Hi, I'm Steve D'Antonio, and I'm in the engine room of this trawler, and for the next few minutes I'm going to talk a little bit about fixed fire extinguishing systems. This vessel has a fixed fire extinguishing system. This large red bottle contains what's called a clean agent. It's a gas that leaves no residue once it's discharged. That's one of the main advantages of this system, is that when you do discharge it, it puts the fire out, but unlike a regular handheld fire extinguisher, the type we're all accustomed to, it doesn't leave that white powder behind that is messy and also corrosive. Instead, this is a gas. The gas that's in these fire extinguishers is what's known as a clean agent, and there are a couple of different types that you can choose from. The primary differences between the two main types is one is designed for what they call a normally occupied space, and the other is designed for what's known as a normally unoccupied space. Strictly speaking, or technically, an engine room is considered an unoccupied space, but the fact that I'm here and the fact that I spend so much time in engine rooms, I'd argue with that point. So I would say engine rooms, from my perspective, are normally occupied spaces. Therefore, I would want to choose a clean agent that is designed for a normally occupied space. One of those is known as FM200. So if you're selecting a system for your boat, if you're having a boat built, if you're having one of these systems installed, or you're having one replaced, my recommendation would be to choose one that is designed for a normally occupied space. Again, FM200 is one of those gases that is designed for areas where people would normally be. What's the difference? Well, the gas that's designed for a normally occupied space will put the fire out, but it'll also give people enough oxygen to breathe to get out of the space. So if you happen to be in here when this system discharged, if it went off accidentally, or if somebody set it off, you'd have time to safely exit the space without being overcome by the gas. The systems that are designed for normally unoccupied spaces don't guarantee that there would be enough oxygen for you to breathe to get out. So for obvious reasons, the systems that are designed for normally occupied spaces, in my opinion, are safer and make a lot more sense. Incidentally, for vessels that are going to the European Union, if they're being built and shipped there, or if they're being built there, they're required to use the clean agent that is designed for normally occupied spaces, again, for safety reasons. So there are some other features about these systems that are worth talking about. You can see on this one there is a black cable that sort of looks like a shift or throttle control, or maybe an old-fashioned bicycle brake cable. That is a manual discharge cable, and it enables you to set this system off manually from outside the engine space. Why would that be important? Well, if you came up to your engine room and you looked in the window or opened the door, if you didn't have a window on your door, and by the way, you should, if you looked into that space and you saw smoke or flames, you would want to set that system off as quickly as possible. You'd want it to go off right away. You wouldn't want to wait for it to be triggered automatically, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. So the manual discharge capability, which is an option, enables you to set the system off at will. If you think there's a fire in the space, you see smoke, you see flames, you can come into this area or not come into this area and trigger the system or discharge it by pulling a handle that's located outside the protected space. So you don't have to go into the area to set it off. That is an option. As I say, most systems are capable of having it added, but not all. So if you're buying a new system, make sure it is capable of getting the manual discharge handle capability. If you have an existing system, there's a possibility that it can be retrofit with that cable if it doesn't already have it. Again, some do not have that capability. So that means that you have the option now of discharging this when you want. From an automatic perspective, and all of these systems are automatic, by the way, the manual discharge is optional, but they all come in automatic mode, meaning when the nozzle on the system reaches 175 degrees Fahrenheit, the system will discharge. So that means, unattended, the system will go off once it reaches that temperature. So if there is a fire in this space, that's good, of course. And again, all of these systems have that automatic capability, so that's standard. What else does this system have? Well, it's got a wire, as you can see here, that is connected to a pressure switch. What does that do? That switch sends a signal to two devices, one of which is a display at the helm station. The other is a relay box. The display simply tells you that the system is charged and ready to be used. It has a green light on it typically. The relay box, on the other hand, which is also an option, will automatically shut down engines, generators, and ventilation systems in engine rooms when the bottle discharges, whether it's manual or automatic. That's extremely valuable because the gas that is in these fire extinguishers will be ingested into engines and they won't stop. They'll essentially breathe it in and expel it out the exhaust, negating the effectiveness of that gas. The ventilation systems in the engine room will just suck it out of the engine room and prevent it from putting the fire out. So it's critically important that engines, generators, and ventilation systems get shut down as soon as one of these systems is discharged. Now you can try to remember to do that yourself in the event of a fire, but chances are that you might forget. You'll be panicking a little bit, perhaps not accustomed to putting out fires, so you might forget, and within a few seconds, if that gas is exhausted by engines and ventilation systems, it's too late, it's gone. So the automatic shutdown feature, again, technically it's an option, but I would say it's very important and I would consider it mandatory. And by the way, it's also required for compliance with American Boat and Yacht Council guidelines, is an important part of this system. It's also typically the most expensive part of the system to install because it requires a significant amount of wiring and interfacing with engines, generators, and ventilation systems. Still, well worth having. So your system should have that. Another note on installation for these systems, ideally you want them installed as high as possible in the compartment because they are temperature sensitive. We want the nozzle to be as close to the ceiling or overhead as possible because we want it to go off as soon as possible. We don't want to have to wait for the heat to reach that nozzle to set it off. We want it to go off quickly in the event of a fire. So as high as possible is important. Also, these bottles are quite heavy, as you can imagine, and so that means we want to make sure that they are securely affixed to a bulkhead. In most cases, that means they need to be through-bolted or attached very substantially with tapping screws. The latter would not be my choice. I would rather see them through-bolted. If they are installed with tapping screws, again, it has to be very substantial and carefully thought out because we don't want to take the risk of, in a seaway, having one of these bottles unship itself from a bulkhead and rolling around this space. If the nozzle were to be damaged or knocked off, the bottle would be a projectile essentially and could be quite dangerous. So secure installation is very important. Another thing to keep in mind with these systems is they do need to be certified or tested from time to time. There are proprietary services that do that, fire extinguishing inspection services. They can come do a visual, but that's not going to tell you very much. Really what you want is somebody to evaluate the system based on the manufacturer's installation guidelines. So use those words. If you're having somebody come to inspect your system, say, I want to make sure that the installation complies with all of the guidelines from the manufacturer of the fire extinguishing system. And by the way, not only do I want you to remove the bottle and weigh it to make sure the amount of agent inside of it is correct, I also want you to test the automatic shutdown system. In other words, I want to make sure that the engines, generators, and ventilation system shut down in the event of a fire. That can be simulated electronically without setting the system off, of course, to make sure that the system works the way it's supposed to. In roughly a third to a half of the vessels that I inspect, when I carry out that test, I find some or all, in some cases, gear not shutting down the way it's supposed to. Engines don't shut down. One engine does, one doesn't. A generator doesn't shut off, or none of the ventilation systems shut down. That's not acceptable. So you want to make sure that the system that you have is actually going to function the way it's supposed to when the time comes to use it, which hopefully is never, but if it does, we want to make sure that it shuts down all the gear that it's supposed to shut down. One other feature that's worth pointing out is this shipping pin. This pin that has a large red tag attached to it is designed to be inserted into this manual discharge mechanism to prevent it from accidentally being discharged. When would you use that? Well, if you were servicing the bottle, removing it from the bulkhead, you would put that pin in to prevent an accidental discharge. During installation, that pin would be in. When the bottle is shipped, that pin is in. Well, in many cases, I encounter systems with the pin still in and the vessel is in service. It's being used. Well, that's bad, because if you try to manually discharge that system, it won't work. You will not be able to set it off. So if your system has one of these pins, make sure that it is removed to ensure that the manual discharge cable will operate if it needs to. A final thought on these systems is, of course, you want to use it if you have a fire. So if you look into the engine room, again, you see smoke, you see fire, you have smoke coming out from underneath a door that doesn't have a window in it. That's what this system is for. It prevents you from having to go into harm's way. If the system is set off, the idea is we want that agent to soak the engine room for at least 10 to 15 minutes, making sure that it's put out all the fires. In that time, if you have the capability to shut off battery switches, to disable power, in case this is an electrical fire, you should do that after the system has been discharged. And then after 10 to 15 minutes, the space should be ventilated, meaning you are bypassing the automatic shutdown with a switch at the helm station. That will then enable you to reactivate the blowers or ventilation system in the engine room. You will exhaust any agent that's left, as well as fumes and fire byproducts. And then you should be prepared to enter that space with a portable fire extinguisher in hand, so that if there is or any remnants of a fire or anything flares up when you return, you're in a position to put that fire out. Fixed fire extinguishing systems, cheap insurance, absolutely worth having on every vessel that has an enclosed engine space, and I would encourage everyone to have one. So there's a lot of value in having a window in the hatch to the engine room or hatches to the engine room, because, as I said, you can look through that before you enter the space to see if you see smoke or, worse, fire. It might be a long time before you get clues otherwise, especially if it's a good tight engine room that doesn't have any gas leaks. There could be something smoldering in there for some time. So you don't want to go in there if that's the case, at least without knowing it. So that window, very important. The other issue is, as I mentioned earlier, we want to make sure that if that system goes off, the gas is contained in the engine room. The clean agent has to be there, obviously, to put the fire out. And if it leaks out of the engine room through the ventilation system or through the engines, clearly that's not good. But also, if the door is open and you leave it open, some people do this for ventilation. They'll leave a lazarette door open, or when they're leaving the boat, they leave this open. You're negating the value of the fire extinguishing system, because you're going to allow that gas to leave the engine compartment. It's not going to be contained anymore. Also, with the door open, it'll take longer for the engine room to get hot in the event of a fire, and longer for the fixed fire extinguishing system's automatic nozzle to discharge. So if the door is open, you're extending that whole process. You're also allowing smoke and flame and other things to leave the engine room potentially, and it may not put the fire out. It may take longer to go off, and it may not put it out as well. So really a lot of good reasons to leave these doors shut. Certainly while you're underway, most people do that, but a lot of folks leave these doors open when the boat's at the dock or while they're at anchor. My recommendation would be to make sure that these doors stay shut from a fire protection approach, if nothing else, so that you're containing the fire and you're containing the fixed fire extinguishing agent or the gas to make sure it puts the fire out as effectively as possible.